Everybody. Welcome, everybody, to the Koinonia Lunch Hour on Wednesday, the 1st of July 2012. My name's Olumide Isiavwe. I've got a couple of very exciting guests with us today. Give me a second, and you will look at my face in a short while. There we go. There I am. Thank you, everybody, for making out the time to be with us this afternoon. As usual, this is the Kingdom in Motion. Uh, the show every Wednesday, the program where we have conversations that intersect faith and real life, where heaven touches real life. And if you've been with us over the last few weeks, good to see you, Gerard. If you've been with us over the last few weeks, we've had an interesting journey. We've been dealing with all kinds of societal issues, from race protests to coronavirus issues, and we've had a whole range of very amazing guests. I've got two with me this afternoon. They're in the studio. I can see them. Thank you so much. And so I am going to introduce them to you in a second. So here we go. This is Detective Chief Superintendent Richard Tucker. Thank you so much, Richard, for joining us this afternoon. Can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Excellent. Yes. Thank you so much for coming on and making the time. I know this is a very busy period for you guys. And also in the studio with me as well, a woman that I have come to have a lot of regard and respect for and fondness for. She is the immediate past mayor of the Waltham Forest Borough of London and still a councillor with the Waltham Forest Borough of London, Councillor Yemi Osho. Can you hear me, ma'am?
Yes, thank you, Israel. Thank you for having me this afternoon.
Thank you so much for coming and making the time. I know both of you are very busy, and so this means a lot, and I'm sure it means a lot to the people who are watching. And so everybody, do me a quick favor before we go any further. I want you to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, but I want you to like this video and share it. Get somebody involved or on who should be involved in this conversation. So tell them we're having a very important conversation. They don't want to miss it, and make sure they come on. And if you're on, smash and hit that like button so the social media algorithms can do their job in getting this video where it needs to go. So, back to my guest. Now, I'm going to be swiveling my head because my camera is here, but my screen is here. So, if you notice me pointing away from you, it's because I'm pointing to where I can see you. Good to see you, Michelle. It's because I'm pointing to where I can see you. So, bear with me, and at some point during every show, I kind of figure it out. And so I'm going to start with Detective Tucker. Would you just mind telling the people watching who you are, what you do? Because one of the things I've come to find out is a lot of people in community, especially faith communities, don't really understand how local government and law enforcement work. So we see prime minister questions. We know who the quote and unquote big guys are. We don't understand how to engage with everyday civic life.
Okay.
So would you please tell them who you are, what you do, and a little bit about your job and what it entails?
Okay. So my name's Richard Tucker. I've been in the police 34 years. I am a detective, but my role now is more importantly.
Richard, could you take your volume up just a little bit?
Commander for two boroughs.
Richard, would you mind taking your volume up just a little bit if possible? If you could get your volume up just a little bit, that'd be great.
Can you hear me now?
Okay, that's fine. We'll make do with that. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, go on.
Yeah, okay. So I'm sort of the senior police officer for Waltham and Newham in East London, and under that I have 4 strands, maybe safeguarding, which incorporates all safeguarding that has a criminal justice element to it. The neighbourhood policing, which is something we'll talk about in terms of engagement with us. So we have got cops in every ward, 40 wards covering both boroughs. I then have a CID unit that with serious crime. Then I've got responsibility for the 24-hour policing of both boroughs as well. So 24 hours a day, every 1,400 staff, and support agents and inspectors are hard. my day job, I suppose, is building relationships at a senior level with people in charities, business, local authority, education and health, and dealing with the tricky issues of the day. So the last couple of years, very much focused around life, careers, injury, on boroughs. We fortunately involved some very young people, some children, 14 and 15-year-olds losing their lives. So that's really been my focus on a day-to-day basis. How do I tackle that and mitigate that risk? And then some of the broader issues around some of the issues that affect people on the street, antisocial behaviour, and in particular mental health. It's a rising problem on our streets. And in terms of the agency that deals with them, we are lent on heavily because we are there 24 hours a day. So that's as much a part of our daily work as catching robbers and thieves. So it's a very varied job. And I say I didn't always do this. I've been on the specialist squads, drug squads, homicide squads, serious crime squads all over London, taking me all over the UK. I've been to America, New York, investigating the murder, and all over Europe. But this will probably be my last post, and I'll probably aim to retire in the next couple of years. But there's plenty of work to do here.
And we're glad and we're grateful to have you. Thank you so much. And I mean, by have you, I mean working in our streets, keeping us safe. Thank you so much. Councillor Yemi, would you let the people know who you are, a little bit about you and what you do? Because most people hear councillor. What does that mean?
Is in this meeting with the borough commander of police for Waltham Forest and Newham. It's a pleasure to have you, Richard. Taking your time to obviously come on this show. Yes, so my name is Councillor Yemi Osho. I'm the councillor representative for Leabridge Ward in Waltham Forest. And I am also a nurse practitioner of over 30 years. I've worked in the NHS now well over 30 years, as well as being in a senior management role within the NHS. And of course, in 2014, I stand for an election, and I was elected, as I mentioned, the councillor for Leabridge Ward. And in 2017, I was elected as the first citizen of the borough, as the mayor of Waltham Forest. So I have been very much involved in community activities, both in terms of my activism, even in the NHS as an activist, as well as community leader. I've always wanted to make a difference in people's lives, which is what has propelled me to stand as an elective representative.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So last week, we had a conversation with two police officers, one from the New York Police Department, Officer Rosalio Sosa, and someone from your unit or your team, Richard Wahid Khan, who was very gracious with his time, and we're grateful to both of them. Now, this week we're having a little bit of a split. We thought, okay, let's bring in the issue of the actual local government, or the issues or the perspective of local government to some of the issues we have today. Moving forwards, perhaps if Councillor Yemi will be so gracious as to come back, we can have an only councillors show one day where we actually just talk to local councillors about the things that they want the community to know and understand about relating with them. So, Richard, I'm going to come back to you. Unless anyone's been living under a rock, we understand that, and this is not just in the UK. Around the world, there is an anti-police sentiment that is going on right now. In the United States, we saw the deaths back to back of three people George Floyd. The whole world saw that. We saw videos of Ahmaud Arbery, and we also saw a lady called Breonna Taylor get shot in her own home. Prior to this, because I have the fortune, or should I say, burden, of being both a leader in the quote unquote minority community as well as the faith community. And so we've always known that there has been this sentiment in the minority community, especially the black community, that the police are, should I say, slightly more heavy handed in dealing with people of color. I think we've lost Richard's video. I'm not sure if we still have his audio. Slightly more heavy-handed in dealing with people of color than perhaps people who are not of color. So from your perspective, I'm not sure if I still have Richard. I can see his audio feed, but his video is gone. Richard, can you just let us know if you're there, even if we can't see your video? All right, I think we've lost Richard temporarily. We'll see if we can get him back on. So, Councillor Yemi, well, can I come to you while we're waiting for Richard to get back on the stream?
Yes. Yes, in relation to community engagement.
I'm really sorry. You broke up really.
Okay, I think Richard's trying to get back.
Badly there. I can hardly hear you. Could you repeat, please?
Okay, can you hear us now, though? Because we can't see you. Okay, Richard, if you could drop out of the stream and then just log back in. So if you could drop out the stream and then log back in, that'd be great. So I'm going to come to Councillor Yemi while we're waiting to get Richard sorted. Thank you. So Councillor Yemi, over to you.
Right. I was going to say that community engagement is critical for the local government. When we planning services for our local residents, it is important that we reach out to every members of the community to get an understanding about their needs. So the local government and perhaps even the public sector, other public sectors, do come together in terms of the what we call joint needs assessment, strategic needs assessment. So this is why we use the data in terms of the national census statistics to understand the composition of the local community in terms of their diversity, in terms of their health, in relation to
iPhone charger.
Carry on, Councillor Yemi.
In relation to policing, in relation to how the healthcare is commissioned based on the number of the population. So community engagement is quite critical. And so you have to have that divergence of information in order for the government to meet the needs of its population. So as a council, for example, on a yearly basis, we would set up, of course, the budget based on the central government funding, which, as you all know, over the last 10 years, the average council have actually lost significant amount due to the austerity measures imposed by the government. So again, that will have impacts in the way in which the local authority will be able to respond to the need of the residents in the borough. We also make sure that we engage with not just different sector of the population, but we also take into consideration perhaps engaging with even churches, mosque, all the faith groups as well. And I must say that in Waltham Forest, I would like to say that we have enjoyed the community cohesion based on the fact that we have done a significant level of work with different parts of the community. Of course, there's always room for improvement, and we continue to do so even during this difficult time. So we've been working with, for example, community mutual aid groups, various charities that have come obviously together very quickly to be able to help the vulnerable group in our borough. So I probably just stop there for for a moment, and perhaps I can elaborate more as we continue with this dialogue.
Awesome, awesome, ma'am. So we're trying to get Detective Richard back in. If anyone from his team is watching, he's actually been taken out the stream. So if you could please put him back in the stream, hopefully we'll get his video and audio working at the same time. So while we're waiting for Detective Richard to come back in, I'm going to just carry on with this dialogue with Councillor Yemi till he's back. So the question you got, Councillor Yemi, sorry for throwing that on you, was actually a Richard question. Oh, I think he's coming back in. It was actually a question for him. And if he's back in, okay, let's see. I think he's in now. Let's give him a chance to give an answer to that question as well. Let me see.
Sorry, everyone. I've had a nightmare of the IT here, and
that's
Wi-Fi
fine. We
sorts.
understand.
So I've relocated, and that sounds a bit better. So
okay,
could you repeat your question, please?
That's fine. We can't see you at the moment. So do you mind?
Oh, can you see me now?
No, we can hear you, but we can't see you.
All right.
Well, let's just carry on. If you can sort that out as we go along, that'd be great. But in the interim, as long as we can hear you, that's the most important thing.
All right. Okay.
So
what was the question, please?
The question was, in light of all that's gone on with issues between law enforcement and certain communities in the last few months all around the world. It's not just a UK problem, all around the world. We've seen protests, we've seen riots, we've seen an anti-police sentiment. What's your take, first of all, on the situation, and secondly, on the opinion that certain people have that law enforcement isn't exactly equitable between communities of color and other communities?
It's so in a question like that, you can never separate the personal and the professional. So as you would probably expect, very reflective time for me and other senior leaders of policing in London. And I think it's right that it would have been too easy to dismiss an incident that happened over 4,000 miles away as something that isn't actually acutely connected with how we work in London. So it's a challenge on contemporary policing. And how do we show that we are fair and equitable to all the people that we look after? So for me, as a senior police officer, I see myself as working at a senior level within public service, just not policing. So my day is taken up by dealing with education and health and local authority, and it's a challenge for all agencies about how do we demonstrate that we are working together to actually stop what is an unfairness and inequality across all things. So I sit here as a cop in my uniform, and I think one of our biggest issues is that we are the visible face of the state, if you like, and people have got many grievances, and some of that is criminal justice and some of that is interaction with police, but some of that is access to health, some of that is access to school and opportunities and decent housing, and their frustrations are taken out on the state, and who do they see is your cop on the street. So it's a complicated one, but all the time we've got a duty, and it's a very old-fashioned word, that is a duty that we've sworn an oath to actually uphold the law and to keep people safe. So we've got to have that balance, and there's so many challenges in modern policing, because we are very much, I think a cop said years ago, we are very much the anvil that people smash their grievances against. And well, I think I won't accept that the police service is the same as it was 30, 40 years ago. It wasn't. I think we've changed immeasurably over those years. Our processes are very, very different. We're far more reflective. We haven't got there yet, but we're far more reflective of the communities that we serve. But interestingly, as we move forward, I think the police service of years ago that, say, my father joined, were very reflective of the society, because they're very much drawn from working class backgrounds. Whereas I look at the organisation that I belong to now, we're very sort of middle class, if you like, very well educated, all got degrees, all that. Do they have that empathy with communities that maybe I and my father's generation had? I don't know. Again, that's another challenge, because diversity is many things, isn't it? It's not just necessarily the colour of your skin. Is it the humanity is, do you have empathy for other humans that you work with, and do you understand their issues? And the police police is full of ordinary men and women who come to work every day, put a uniform on, and do their best in sometimes very, very trying circumstances. And the issues that we have, just being a cop, because we carry our warrant card, our police card, we deal with people in their lowest moments, and we also deal with, sometimes when you hear all the issues that people have with policing, is there's some very, very violent people out there. There's some gangs out there. There's people who would take advantage of the most vulnerable. And part of our job is that guardianship of communities. And that naturally brings us in conflict with people, because we're the only people there who's going to fight that fight for them. And it's a really difficult one, because I want my cops to be robust with the right people. And sometimes policing, as in life, is not a perfect science. And my challenge, I suppose, is we need to get it right every single day, because if people feel aggrieved, and it's just not the police, they feel aggrieved by the state because of the way an officer has behaved towards them, that relationship takes years, if not tens of years, to rebuild that trust and confidence they have in us. But I'm confident as I sit here, because we've got our body worn camera, for every bad interaction that someone may have had, I can show 10 interactions that have been amazing, saving people. And then, but the issue around inequality, around health inequality, because we deal with an awful lot of mental health. Our officers saved a young man the other day who tried to take his own life. And the footage from the body-worn camera is absolutely amazing, what these officers did to save his life. But he was from the black community. But as I sit there and I want to scream, look, oh, this is how we look after people. But is that an indication that mental health and inequality within access to health services, is that something? And I do raise it, because that it would appear to be, there's so much disproportionality across so many agencies, or from the figures that we're speaking. But in terms of the anger towards the police, is I always say to people, but I get what people being angry with us, because we uphold the law, because we tell people to behave themselves sometimes. But some people we'll deal with, they're annoyed with bus drivers, they're annoyed with security guards, they're annoyed with school teachers, they're angry with their parents, their relatives, their friends. There's something underlying there, that anger towards authority or sort of social norms is an underlying trend about, I would say, not just necessarily about the police, but about all the issues that are going on in people's lives around opportunity, in particular around work, education and housing. And that's why I work with public servants like Temi to work through that, so everyone has a fair crack at those opportunities that our society holds. And the opportunities are are numerous. If you ask one of the mayors locally about, young people are bored, they will hit the roof, because we couldn't put any more money or resources into sports, diversion, theatre, arts, all those opportunities. But still, there's a cohort of people say, young people are bored. But that doesn't mean you give up. It means you go away and you reflect and you redouble your efforts, because ultimately we, and I say we as public servants, want to create an environment where everyone is safe and everyone is in a position to thrive. So I don't know if that answers the question. I was rambling on a bit there.
It's a great start. Thank you. And I appreciate, and let me say this on behalf of many of us, because obviously if you're watching me, in case you missed it, I am what you would classify as an IC3 male, so I'm black. I've grown up all my life being black and in certain communities. And Richard, you are the first police officer I have asked this question, and I've spoken to a few privately and publicly in the last few weeks, who has started off his response acknowledging there's a problem. And I want to commend you for that, because contrary to what some parts of the media, some parts of the far-right media would propose, people in the black community aren't an angry mob who don't understand the difference between a few bad actors and the whole bunch. All we've been saying is the few bad actors seem to disproportionate. So in essence, if there's 100 police officers, we'll take the word that 90 of them are great guys who do their job, who serve and protect. And there's only a minority of 10 who are dangerous or troublesome. The point that has been made is if that 10% is targeting or interacting with people of color at a far higher disproportionately at a disproportionately far higher rate, then there is a problem. So very quickly before I carry on, would you agree with that premise, Richard? That if it's a minority,
absolutely. Because if it wasn't the minority, we'd be really in trouble, wouldn't we? Because London's got 9 million people in it. The area that I work has got the best part of 700,000 people in it. So it is a minority, and it's a question that I want all my police officers. Well, actually, they're not my police officers; they're your police officers, because they serve London. I want them to be challenging themselves that big question about, right, so these lads, and it's generally young lads who are getting involved in that. So we've had several instances where people have, last year, very rare in London, but they turned guns on police and let off a couple of rounds at police. 4 lads in the car. They got arrested. They were lucky they weren't shot dead, but they got arrested. They all got 25 years in prison. They were all from the black community. And my big question is, all the opportunities those lads have had, why did they make those choices? I mean, really poor life choices. And that's the challenge. It's because we can arrest and put people in prison all day long. But the answer is, for me to go home at night and be satisfied, is I don't want people to be committing serious crime. And we've got to think is that there's a disproportionality of young men and boys who we keep coming across from the same community who are involved in some very, very serious crime. And we've got to challenge ourselves and say, why is that? Why is that? And is it disproportionate amount of school exclusion? Is it family breakdown? Is it domestic violence? Is there more we can do when they're younger? So there's a positive interaction. So that's where I'm at the moment, and my thinking is quite settled on that.
Before you go down, Richard, down that track, because I do want to come to that conversation, and I want to get Yemi's take on that, because you are right, and I do have some perspectives as to what the issue is, and I don't think it's necessarily a demographic issue. I think the fault lines lie. This is my personal opinion. The fault lies lying very nicely along, like you mentioned, issues of systemic access to opportunity over generations. But coming back to that point, and I'm gonna bring Yemi in here, but I want you to coming back to that point. So you mentioned the fact that any guy, any person of any color, shoots a few rounds at a police officer and gets 25 years in jail. If they assault a police officer, they get some time in jail. If they attempt to assault a police officer, even if it's not successful, there's still a repercussion to pay. The question in some people's, and somebody's made mention, can we put that question on the screen, Jamie, about the McPherson report? Because we will come to that. So, Michelle, I'm with you. And Richard, let me just put this here as well. I got a few people on, not a few, but some people on my show who will not give me a good night's sleep if I seem to be soft with you. So if I seem like I'm coming after you, it's not personal. I'm just being I'm a conduit for a community of people who want to ask some questions, and you've been kind enough to give me the access on their behalf. So as I'll be respectful and I'll be understanding, but I just have to give you the questions they want asked, if that makes any sense.
Okay.
And if you answer those questions satisfactorily, I think this will go a long way towards repairing some of the relational damages that have happened over the last few weeks. So the question some people want to know is, why is it that when a police officer does the exact opposite, he seems to go home scot-free more than often?
So can you give me an example when you say this does something like what?
So just this morning,
because if they're dealing drugs, they get arrested and they get dealt with as they would anyone else.
We're talking about if they interact with the public in a put this way, if you take the badge off, if you would call that interaction assault, right?
Right.
So if you remove the badge, if a normal person did this to me, they would face certain repercussions. Now, we understand it's a difficult job. We understand split-second decisions have to be made, which is why there are reviews and, we get that. But why does it seem to be? For instance, this morning, I saw a video this morning. I wish I could play it, but it came too late in the show or in the preparation for the show to get it ready, in which a black man in London, this was taken over the last few days, is being arrested by 5-6 police officers, supposedly over what they would call a spliff. So a joint, a marijuana stick, right? And you can see the public all shouting, you don't need to do that. He's not fighting you. He's not attacking you. Why does it take 6 of you pepper spraying and tasing him, kneeling on him, wrestling him, almost breaking his arm? What is it about one black man that seems to, because every time I've heard a police officer, both in the States and in the UK, because we've got a few of our viewers from the States, in the States and the UK, they always reach for the, I felt my life was in danger, or I felt threatened. But then we see time after time after time interactions with people of other colors, especially people of the Caucasian color, where almost like for like, there doesn't seem to be the same aggression and the same visceral need to quote and unquote protect yourself from a potential negative interaction. And if you're like me, you've been living for decades as a black person, you've seen this from when you're a child. You're walking down the street and a mother with a child sees you. You see a white guy your age and your build walk down the street, and there is nothing more than either a wave or just an ignorance, just being ignored. You follow that white guy 30 seconds behind, and you see the woman clutch her purse. You see her hold her child and move to the other side of the road. I've heard people mutter to their children or the people they're with under their breaths. They didn't know I could hear them. And what they're saying is that black guy over there, seemingly just for existing, it seems to be a threat. And so that's what I mean when I say, what do you have to say to the accusation, founded or not, that black people seem to suffer the brunt of the interactions with the few bad apples?
So, we've got 40,000 cops and police staff in London. I'm not naive enough to say that we haven't got challenges with some of those staff, and without seeing the footage that you spoke about, and also knowing what the full facts are, I would say without a doubt, over the years we've had issues with officers who use excessive force, but what I'm saying, you would expect me to say this, is that we face daily violence and abuse every single day. And without a doubt, there is a fatigue that builds up with some street cops in terms of their reaction to people.
Mm-hmm.
So what we've done now, all the street cops have got body worn cameras. So if you give me the details of that incident, I can go away and I can find out what happened, and we can look at the body worn camera. And interesting, we'll see what the run up to that incident was.
Mm-hmm.
And if there was, one of the questions there is about what has changed. So that has changed. We've got body worn camera, we've got CCTV, we wear our name badges, we've got our shoulder numbers, we've got independent advisory groups that were one of the main thrusts out of the Macpherson report, is that we listen to people who are outside the community who give us advice how to police.
Mm-hmm.
We have safer neighbourhood panels which represent the people from each ward, and above that we have safer neighbourhood boards that hold me to account on a monthly basis about how police interact. And one of the subgroups of that is a stop and search board, which I was with on Monday, around how we use the power of a stop and search. But going back to what you spoke about, how does that white woman with her child view a black man walking down the street? That touches on my earlier point that there appears that this is a lot wider than how policing interacts with certain communities, because that's not the position in every part of London. It's not the position in every part of the world. So it would be, it's a tough one because you're dealing with that societal attitude, which, as you pointed out, how do these people get their views? So the media is really interesting. So some of the stuff I've been looking at over the last couple of weeks is, you hear all these stories. I work in the East End, and if people know the area, West Ham Football Club, Bobby Moore's statue.
Mm-hmm.
Bobby Moore was a great West Ham footballer, and he won the World Cup for England. Yeah, but there was a big but we got information that people wanted to tear down Bobby Moore's statue with Jeff Hurst and all the England heroes.
Mm-hmm.
And my first reaction was, where did you hear that from? Where did that information come from? Because there's a lot of disinformation that gets around that is there for one reason, is to drive a wedge between communities and drive a wedge between people. And that's what, so we have a lot of footage goes around about policing, that I always challenge people, ask yourself, what happened before that? Why is that? Because that isn't, I know people will disagree with me, but I've been in the police a long time, and I would encourage you to go and meet your local cops and see what type of people they are. And they are not this stormtrooper type cop. They are not. So we are, 30% of our new recruits, over 30% of our new recruits are female. We've got some way to go with representing other communities in the police, but my big drive is, have people got the right values when they're joining the police? Because you can be as diverse as you want, but you haven't got the right values and you haven't got the right humanity in you to look after people and have empathy with their issues. We're not going to actually move forward with this.
Okay.
So, but you raise a value, and if you send me those details of that footage, I promise you I'll take it. I'll take it forward, because
I'll take you up on that.
Footage like that is really, really damaging. But maybe it's a detective in me. I always think, well, what happened before? What happened before that? What was exchanged before the cameras started rolling? And that's what the police officer will have, because we do. And also,
Richard,
cops.
can I just pause you for a second there, because I want to get Yemi's take on that. We'll carry on down that line. So I'm seeing a couple of people in the comment section, and as you can imagine, Richard, there's people who, don't agree with what you're saying.
That's all right. Don't worry.
And that's fine. My job is to be a mediator.
That's no problem.
I'll probably get called a sellout if I, but that's fine by me. My job is to create a safe space. So I want to get, and I will come to some of those questions. There's some questions in the comment section towards the end. I'm going to give both of you a chance to actually respond directly to what the people are saying. So, Councillor Yemi, I can see you smiling. Penny, for your thoughts.
Yes. I guess, what I would like to say is that against the backdrop of the nationwide and global reckoning over the police brutality in the US, and of course here in UK, and as we have seen the Black Lives Matter movement in the past 1 month, I would say, not only for me as a Black person, it has been a soul-wrenching and heartbreaking to have seen on the media constantly the violence against Black, mostly Black men.
Mm-hmm.
And what we've seen on the streets, of course, is what I would say is a boil over. When you have something in a pressure cooker and the heat is relentless, then it's going to blow. The lid is obviously going to blow.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what we've seen in the Black community. We have seen decades of structural injustice. We have seen decades of violence against, Black and ethnic minority.
Mm-hmm.
And not just in the police force. I just don't want us to just focus on police force, because it's in every part of the society. We talked about earlier on in terms of the educational establishment, that we have seen disproportionate expulsion of children from their education. We have seen issues about poor housing. We have seen issues about health inequality. We have, of course, in terms of social determinants of health, which again is relating to the socioeconomic factors of the Black people. In fact, some of these issues are social constructs in the sense that from the colonization era, we have seen that, the lack of opportunity for the Black and ethnic minority in the attainment of reaching their potential, be it, in various level of societal endeavor. So what we obviously need to look at is what has gone on in the past. What has gone on in the past is the fact that majority of people, when you look at the issues that the Black people face, it's been a constant microaggression, which can be covert or in covert microaggression against Black people. And I've seen that. I have experienced that myself. And I've seen it, experienced by various family members, friends, colleagues, even myself working in an NHS. I can tell you now that I have not been left out without experience injustice. So what Richard is talking about in terms of, yes, we understand that it's only small apple within police force or in this organization that are perpetrators. But the fact of the matter is that as a society, we have not dealt with that structural injustice enough. And that is why, as I want to relate to George Floyd, talking about the police putting knees on his neck for almost 9 minutes. And you just want to ask yourself, how can a human being go to the point where someone that was not a threat to you and crying out that he couldn't breathe, and yet there was no emotional reaction to say,
no compassion, no empathy,
or compassion to stop. And we then end up with this catastrophe, which could have been avoided. This is what we're talking about. I also want to say that when you also have community over the years as well, where you've had parents that have not been able to provide adequate needs for their children, they've had to take 2-3 jobs to make ends meet. They live in a crowded accommodation. The result of the microaggression have actually led to toxic depression, which then lead to chronic ill health. This is what we're talking about. So on one hand, we understand that the society cannot exist without having some sort of policy or action put in place to deal with miscreants in our society or people that will violate the law. But equally, that society itself also needs to ask itself, if at the end of the day we have seen that a Black male particularly 2.5 times more likely to be stopped and searched by the police. And even as at yesterday, I was listening on the news where a 13-year-old jogging with his dad in the park was actually stopped and actually handcuffed. I mean, that was frightening. It's frightening. And what was the reason? It was just the fact that the police felt that if he fit the description of the person that they were looking for. That was just it, and just because the person is Black. So we need to come together, because what has been happening is the fact that some people want to believe that there is no racism. And the question I ask is that unless you've been in that person's shoes, you can never know the pain and the suffering of being discriminated against, being treated unfairly, being given no opportunity to progress in your career, or being able to provide for your loved ones. So this is what we're talking about. And the people who obviously perpetrate racism, is an act of the fact that they feel that they're in the position of power. As someone said, when you take power out of it, the equation, then maybe everyone will be treated equally. But the fact of the matter is, the people who are in the position of power arrogate themselves and with impunity, because nothing is actually been done. We have had series of inquiry, both in terms of Stephen Lawrence, McPherson report, recommendations that were made. We also had Lami's review. The recommendations that have been made in terms of looking at our judicial system to actually be conscious of the fact that they need to look critically about how they do their sentencing in relation to the Black people. I hear Israel just said now that when we talk about a Black person committed a crime, even as I've just read about in terms of someone who's been stopped having maybe illicit drugs, for example. they're more likely male and black um, people are more likely 3 times likely to be
Yep.
sentenced for a long time,
20% longer on average
longer
than
in average than a white
Caucasian
person.
Yes.
So this is what we're talking about. Yes, nobody's going to stop police from policing, the community, but we just need to start peeling the onions and beginning to deal with the structural injustice that the Black people have faced for a long, long time.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Councillor Yemi, because you've done that job for me, because I was going to bring that up. But now that leads us to another question, in my opinion. Like Richard said at the beginning, police are just a cross-section of society. So the badge isn't the issue, in my opinion. The issue is more about society as a whole. In essence, if a person who has a problem with another human being because of the nature of their skin, if you give him a gun and a badge, you're going to have trouble. If you give them a political office, you're going to have trouble. If you put them in charge of society. And so, Richard, I'm not sure if you're still there. I can see. Okay, you are still there. You are not. Or the issue for me is not so much police as it is certain kinds of people in positions of authority. And Richard raised a very valid point at the start that I want to go back to. And I'm glad he did, because I do not condone crime, for the record. I am not making an excuse for crime. I grew up in a community where if you did some of the stuff people have done recently, you wouldn't even need the police. The mothers would be out with their rolling pins back when I was growing up. Just send the moms and the grandmoms into the streets and there would be peace, because your own family would literally deal with you both verbally and in some cases physically back then when I was growing up. So I was raised to have respect for authority. I was raised to have respect for the rule of law. I was raised to self-police our communities. People from the BAME community will agree with this, that we were kind of raised to self-police ourselves. The issue now is, do we agree that systemic inequality exists? So, Richard, I'm coming to you with this question. And then secondly, because talking about the Macpherson report, like Michelle asked in the question she did, one of the things that came out of it when I read into it a while back was the need for police forces to more accurately reflect the communities that they serve.
Okay.
So, Richard, do you want to take that question before I carry on?
Right. So I've seen Michelle's question. So, and it's a fair challenge. What has changed? So, what is the hold up in recruiting members from the Black and Asian community into the policing? Is I've been on 2 calls recently, webinars where we've had over 300 people expressing interest, or they've applied to the police, and I was telling them what it's like. So we are reaching out to everybody to come in, but probably one of our biggest challenges is what we're speaking about today. So we need advocates in the community to say, actually, being in the police is public service, is about helping people. And some people we will never convince that we are the bad guys, but we come to work every day to look after people. We need to be more proactive in actually demonstrating the amazing work that cops do every single day. So we see a video about a violent confrontation between police and someone, and that circulated really bad. But if I circulated emails of us helping someone off a flyover who's going to kill themselves, or pulling them out of the River Lee because they're going to kill themselves, or saving someone who's been stabbed or shot, where's the advocacy there to say, actually, the cops were all right? There's a balance to that, but we have to do more, because the narrative, if you like, is policing. Don't join the police because we're racist and you have a really hard time. What's come out of the last 3 weeks is working with our colleagues is the additional stress that Black and Asian officers have is the verbal and physical abuse they get for being in the police, which is shocking. So we're doing more around that. We prosecute everyone who assaults a police officer if the evidence is there. But I think there is what I really want to concentrate on is what has changed. So I spoke about our governance and scrutiny committees. I know some people will say, "Oh no, that doesn't happen." We have the Independent Office of Police Complaints. They can be instructed direct from the public about a complaint. All our cars are audio and video. All our cell blocks are audio and video. Our officers carry body-worn camera. If you go on the Met Police website, there's a big sign there about how to complain. If you complain, I've got 8 officers who deal with complaints, deal with members of the public, and if people aren't satisfied with the result of that, there's an appeals process that's come up to senior officers, and there's an independent scrutiny of those issues. And we have, and Temi will back me up. We have scrutiny panels where I go along and I'm asked questions by the people who I serve, the people of Waltham Forest and Newham, about policing in their area. Can we do more? So we've got the things you never hear of. So I've got a cadet unit of young people. There's 750 of them, which are completely representative of both the boroughs of Newham and Waltham Forest. 750 young people who we engage with every single week. We do loads of work. They do amazing work in youth clubs and schools and colleges. Never hear a word about it because the police are bad. The police are this, the police are that. And I think we've got to have a mature conversation. And what I want, the last couple of weeks, there's so much noise from the edges. I want that to calm down and then get into the middle and get a really mature conversation about what sort of policing do people want. Because policing is a unique occupation, because at some stage we do deal with people who are really antisocial. All the issues we're talking about, some of the people we deal with blight their communities, blight their neighbourhoods through violence, drug dealing, guns, knives. Somebody's got to deal with that. And that's the police's job. And I want to apologise for misery by the behaviour. And we have to do that. All the issues in Brixton the other night where officers got injured, we were called to that block by members of that community because they were fearful and they were concerned about the noise, they were concerned about the spread of COVID, and we went along to serve the community. So there's something about explaining what we do. So every operation we have, and I've done this for years, we explain beforehand, during and after why we're there, and everything we do is on behalf of the community. It's not me going, "Oh, I'll tell you what, we'll do this today, we'll do that." Everything is driven by what does the community want their police to do. Antisocial behaviour on the 40 wards that I'm responsible for, the 40 wards, every one of those wards, antisocial behaviour, drug taking, open drug taking, smoking cannabis is number one in their concerns. Smoking in stairwells and things and issues like that. Antisocial, being not caring about other people who live in that block. So when we go and deal with it, we explain we're there on behalf of the community. And then when someone doesn't want to engage with us and we end up having some sort of physical confrontation, it's filmed and we're portrayed as the bad guys. And I'm not saying that we're not, well, I'm not saying we're saints, we're not. And we've got our faults and we've got to work hard. But when people question that, you would question anything else, question, actually, is it all bad or is there a balance? Is there a balance for you? And what happens to the cops who complained about? I can promise you, and you can come and see me if you want, and Israel's got my details, you can email me, you can come in and we have independent scrutiny, and I promise you that officers are looked in. I don't want to work with cops who are going around using excessive force and bullying people. That's not my policing philosophy and that's not my values. So, and that goes for almost all the cops I've ever worked for, because we work for London. And then there, I've banged on it and it's gone 2 o'clock. So back to you, Israel.
I appreciate that, Richard. And like I said, for me, I see this as a safe space to have this kind of conversations. So like somebody put in the comment sections, we need to have these mature conversations. And Richard, I will take you up on that offer, because I was speaking to one of my congregants today who works in the council. I think you know the person I'm talking about. I've been burdened over the last few weeks with all this is going on. So I'd like to find out, for instance, what are the processes where a community leader like myself can interface with the police force to be a bridge, perhaps chaplaincy, but in any way we can help. I'm signing up to do more than just have a show. So I will shake your hand on what you've talked about, and I will engage to see how we can drive the conversation forward, or drive the action points forward, because I do agree with you that, and hearing you speak, I can hear it in your voice that you sincerely feel about what you're talking about. And I think I can hear a lot of sincerity and almost pain in your voice. Now, I'm going to come to Councillor Yemi in a second with this question. Now, the pain you're feeling that I'm hearing, the empathy that I'm feeling for the pain I'm hearing in your voice is built over, I'm not going to try and guess how old you are, but 5 decades of life, roughly, maybe 5 to 6 decades of life, and 30 something to 40 decades of public service. Now, the question that some people are asking is, and I'm going to come to Councillor Yemi for this, is, and for the record, I want to make this clear. God forbid, if my biological son was out in the streets doing foolishness, I would handle it real quick and in a hurry, even if he was in his 20s. So I don't condone that at all. However, the point being made is this. In the words of Martin Luther King Jr., a riot is the language of the unheard. In essence, when a people feel like their voices are not being listened to over successive generations, it manifests in unsavory behavior. It's almost like a special needs child in school. You're trained as a teacher or social worker to spot certain antisocial or borderline illegal behavior in juveniles as a cry for help, as a sign that that child might be being abused at home, or that the child might be being neglected, or stuff of that nature. So, Councillor Yemi, first of all, do you agree with that premise? Not do you agree with the fact that they should resort to riots and crime and things of that nature, but do you agree that as a whole, some of the behavior emanating from certain communities are a cry? Because when you look at, and this is the same in policing, is a lot better for those of you in the UK. It's a lot worse in the States. I tell you that. I've studied the statistics. So our officers are not perfect, but they're not the worst in the world. For instance, there were, I think, 2 people killed by the police unarmed in the whole of the UK last year. There were 450 in the States. I know America is a bigger population. It is not that disproportionate in terms of population. So, but the question now is, Councillor Amy, do you agree with that, first of all? And if you do, what do you think are some of the, for the people who are not black or minority people watching, and for those in political office like yourself and in law enforcement, what are some of the, if you agree with that point, what are some of the unspoken cries that need to be addressed at the root of this issue from the minority community? I think you're on mute, Councillor. Councillor Yemi, would you take yourself off mute? There you go. Carry on.
I just want to echo what you said as well, that never in a million years I would also condone violence. And as you said, in fact, in African families, we have the adage that it takes a village to raise a child. And that has been always what has given us some sort of value in terms of, the education that we always impact on our children. And of course, what tends to then happen is that you have some children in any community that they would obviously revolt against that, some set of rules. And also in relation to issues about why we will have a situation where people will resort in violence or malpractices. We also need to look back in terms of the social construct. I always say to people that I was privileged working alongside my husband when he was doing a dissertation about the myth and reality of Black fathers. And what the research shown is that on average, a Black family or a man is the head of the house. And when you have a situation where a Black father, for example, in this case, have not been able to fulfill, their biological responsibility, either because of the structural inequality that have placed them perpetually not able to hand a good living in terms of income that will sustain the family, then you can see how gradually they might get involved in vices like involving in illicit drugs, or perhaps not able to cater for their family, and then they become absent fathers. So it is not necessarily that they want to be in that position, but then the social inequality have placed them in that position. So this is what I think we need to seriously look at, the social determinants of health. And of course, we also know that an healthy mind is an happy soul. Health is central to human dignity. And as I said earlier on, when you have had years of facing injustice, denigration treatment, that you've not been able to attain, your potential, then what I said is release is toxic cortisol, what we call it in the body. Your body will produce cortisol, which will then lead you to have depression. And then, of course, when you have depression, then you will end up with chronic health conditions. And not even just that. If I want to talk to you about now the impact of, let's say, for example, people living in a poor housing, where the house is damp, you've got families in overcrowded housing, as we have seen again with this COVID-19 pandemic, which has actually been a magnifying lens in which we've now even have, or people now realize, the long-standing, the social injustice and the structure that have impacted on the Black and ethnic minority for generations. This is why we're now talking about these issues. So I hear with sense of sincerity as well from Richard in that in UK, we haven't had a level of violence against Black and minority like in the States because of the police engagement. And I can also attest to the fact that in Waltham Forest as well, over the years, we've engaged with our police. For example, last year, June 2019, we launched the Violence Reduction Partnership, which our police are very much critical at the heart of that. And it's about engaging with the local community, the schools, health, to beginning to see how we can address some of these issues, some of the social injustice. And we've gone along. And I can also say that we also have the opportunity in a borough where we engage with faith groups as well. So we've done a lot of work, but obviously there's always going to be a room for improvement. I will continue to say that we still need to do more. We need to do more to ensure that going forward, that we're beginning to address some of these issues that lead to perhaps young people resorting into violence, We need to ensure that, services are put in place for them to be able to engage better with the wider society, so that we don't continue to see these issues where young people are locked up in their young age for 30 years. When I was the mayor, I had the opportunity to go to the Old Bailey, and I had a conversation with the judge, who was telling me that in his over 30 years of experience in the judicial system, he has seen the high proportion of Black young people being locked up for over 30 years. And it's not something that he's happy with. And of course, he reached out that perhaps there has to be some sort of relationship from our community as well with the judicial system, because again, some of our young people don't even understand when they're committing crime that they might end up, for the rest of their lives in prison, and by the time they get out of it, they have lost their formative years and they're not even going to be useful or have any valuable contribution to the society. I mean, this is it's heartbreaking for me as a person, and I see much of that in our community. And I believe that we can't just also leave it on the hands of the government or the police or the health to deal with it. I think for us as a community as well, we need to come forward and engage with uh, all layers of the government itself. So we have a lot of work to do, but I'm cautiously optimistic that this is the moment. We need to use this moment to beginning to have critical conversation with the police, with the health, with the local authority, and beginning to tackle some of the social determinants of health. And of course, yeah.
Awesome. Quick one. I've got a couple of people in the studio with me who wanted to ask questions, and so I'm gonna let them go on in a second. Before I do that, Richard has sent me a message. One quick second. Let me just tell someone else they can come in. Okay, so I've got 3 people who are going to ask a question each. Now, Richard has sent me some information I want to read out. He says we should check the figures, read the death following police contact. The figure he has is 163 in 10 years. Folks, compared to the States, I'm not being a sellout, I'm just being honest. That is low. Now, the question and what I would then ask Richard in response is, what's the proportion of Black to white or minority to white? And what is the per capita proportion? Because I hear a lot of people throwing out the fact that, for instance, in the States, when I did the show a few weeks ago, some people put comments up on my social media about the fact that, well, there were twice as many white people killed by the police as Black people the year before. My response was then, there's 5 times as many white people as Black people in the States. So if the ratio per capita is 5-1 and the ratio of death is only 2-1, then that is obviously an issue of disproportionality. Now, I want to go back to something Richard said at the start. The police are the face of the state. They are the guys we see on the streets every day. And so it's a very valid question that, are we taking out our frustration at a system on the visible part of the system? So we have the social justice element, we have the educational element, we have the financial element. Like Councillor Yemi said, the fact that BAME individuals are disproportionately affected by COVID is very easy to explain. It's not biological, it's not genetic, it's not spiritual. There's 3 main factors. 1, our health is the poorest to start with, so pre-existing conditions and comorbidities are already high. Secondly, our housing and our access to non-public transport is way disproportionate. So the vast majority, a disproportionate amount of us have to be on public transport, have to live in council estates, in areas where you literally cannot socially distant. You come out of your front door and you're staring 3 people in the face. You have large numbers of people per household because you have generations of children and family members who can't afford to live on their own. So there's that. And then there is also the element of yes, the fact that there's a disproportionate amount of us who are what you would call key workers. And so the vast majority of people of color and black people, because of what some of us would consider to be systemic injustice, have been forced into taking jobs that disproportionately expose us to a public pandemic. So we're the grocery workers, we're the bus drivers, we're the ones who can't really afford to work from home or have the job security that gives us the ability to go on a furlough. And so I just want to put that out there before I go to questions, that this is beyond a police issue. And even when it comes to the wrong interactions of police, if you have a society that is predisposed to be biased, sometimes just what we call white privilege. And for those of you who have been asking me the question, I've defined it a few times, because every white person I talk to at first gets angry. What are you saying? I have privilege? No. Privilege is not a bad thing. Let me explain this. When the lockdown was at the height, my wife is a medical doctor. She's a key worker. I'm a clergyman. I'm also a key worker. Our children were allowed to be in school when everybody else had to homeschool. That was privilege. So that's an example of what privilege is. It's not wrong by nature to have privilege. It just means that you're accorded either a benefit of a doubt or a facility that other people don't have. Now, like I explained last week, the flip side is the reason why our children were allowed to be in school was we were expected to pay back on that privilege by doing a service to the nation. My wife was expected to go put herself in harm's way every day, dealing with sick patients who could have COVID. I was expected to be in the community, whether virtually or physically, helping bring a sense of calm and focus and direction to a troubled society. And so privilege is not a horrible thing if you recognize it and you use it for the greater good. And so what we're saying to those outside the community is there's certain benefits of the doubt systemically and generationally that you've been given. Can you now pay forward in helping a community that sees itself as oppressed? And I'm using words like this not because I don't believe it is, but I'm talking to a wider section of people. So even if you don't agree, if we see ourselves as oppressed, will you join the fight by using your leverage and your platform and your quote-unquote privilege to help drive that forward? So I'm going to give 3 people a chance to come in. Tribuna, you can come in immediately now so I can air you once you go. So I'm going to let Michelle go, and I've changed my mind. If you want us to see your face, just put yourself on video. We'll show your face. If you don't want us to see your face, just click on the button that says stop cam, and all we'll do is hear your voice. So Michelle, I'm going to give you 2 minutes to ask a question, and then I'm going to let the panel respond. Give 3 people a chance to come in. Tribuna, you can come in immediately now so I can air you once you go. So I'm going to let Michelle go, and I've changed my mind. If you want us to see your face, just put yourself on video. We'll show your face. If you don't want us to see your face, just click on the button that says stop cam, and all we'll do is hear your voice. So Michelle, I'm going to give you Michelle, if you could put on the video in your background, or the sound,
okay,
sorry.
Thank you.
The
can you
audio
hear
in
me
your background. Good. Excellent. Yeah, we can hear you. Go for it.
Okay, grand. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I didn't expect to actually come onto the show, even respond the way I have done in the comments. Just saying hello to Yemi, who is a dear friend of mine, and also to, is it Richard, the policeman you've got on?
Yes.
I do, yes. Let me turn that down. I'll turn that down. Is that better? Yeah?
That's
so anyway, thank you very much. It's a question I have for the police officer, the detective. I acknowledge that it's not the entire police force that is guilty of misconduct. So I was a nurse myself, and there's a process involved. If I harm a patient or if I behave inappropriately towards a patient, there's a process that I have to be held accountable by, either through, it might be something that, I might end up being disciplined, or if, depending on how serious it is, you get referred to the Nursing and Midwifery Council, the NMC, where you are almost put under a kind of trial process, really, investigation and trial process, where they then consider whether you should be struck off the nursing register because of how serious your misconduct was or how seriously you wounded or hurt a patient. So I just wondered whether there must be some process like that in policing, But what I also want to say is that it's also useful to hear the statistic that were quoted earlier, because again, what you get with the social media is a lot of these videos going around, and you see something that looks inappropriate, some behavior that's inappropriate by a set of police officers with one individual who's usually a BAME person. But you don't then hear what the outcome was. You don't know whether those policemen were held to account, or whether they were, disciplined or anything like that. So it's just useful to know what the process is for when a police officer is found to have, perpetrated some misconduct during the line of duty.
Awesome. I think that's a great question. Also, I'll lob that to Richard in a second. Let me just tack this on. I keep forgetting her name now. Is it Tori Walker? I can't remember her name now, but she's an American, Black American author. I just can't remember. No, Tommy Morrison. Yes, Tommy Morrison. I watched a video in which she was interviewed 2 years ago, before this powder keg, and she was asked about the race relations, police, black people, and the white interview brought up the Rodney King riot in 1992. So for those of you who are screaming Black Power, this has been going on a long time. Get yourself educated. Nothing is more harmful to a cause than when the people who propose to push the cause forward don't even understand how we got here. And this is not new. George Floyd wasn't the first person. He was just the current day version we caught on camera. And she was asked what she thought about the rioting and the violence in LA. And her response was that she wasn't surprised at the violence or the criminal response. She said she was surprised it took so long. And the man was taken aback and said, "What do you mean by that?" And her response was, it was a year after he died when the riot started, because the people waited for a criminal justice system to handle the issue, and the criminal justice system failed them. And so they were saying, if you won't hold these people accountable, we will tell you how we feel about it. So Richard, I'd like to know from your perspective, because you have information we don't have, and we're not asking you to reveal any quote unquote trade secrets, but in your opinion, what do you have to say about Michelle's question as to the process to hold accountable, or even determine the need to hold accountable police officers who are found involved in this kind of behavior?
Okay, so very quickly, I could bore everyone with our processes, but in a nutshell, people can complain either through a third party or individually, so they can come through a solicitor, family member, community leader, or they can come to ourselves. They can do it on the phone, in person, or online. That complaint will be recorded. Then there's an assessment made of it, and it then goes to our central unit, which will make an assessment whether it can be dealt with locally or it can be dealt with at the centre in terms of the assessment of gravity around what the allegation may be. The immediate an allegation is made, as I spoke about, we then go under, we seize the body-worn camera, CCTV, any papers involved, and they're secured. And then an assessment is made, should the officer be removed from duties, gated or suspended, or they're allowed to carry on their duty as the complaint is made. So, and then it's investigated like any crime. There's an independent angle to that. People they're not happy with the officers from the local area investigating it. We can get officers from outside. There's many sanctions in terms of losing your rank, losing your job, final written warning, or words of advice in terms of professional learning. And those hearings where people can lose their job, they're public now, and they're chaired by an independent chair who's not a police officer. But one of the challenges is being a police officer. There's police regulations and there is due process to follow. It's not like working in any other job, because we're in an office, not an employee. It's a complicated legal term that I don't truly understand, if I'm honest. But so I can't dismiss cops despite some of their behaviour. It has to go through a due process, and that takes a long time. And Isabel, interesting what you said there. That's where people lose a lot of trust and confidence because it takes so long. Whereas sometimes I'm a big fan of getting around there, seeing people, and if we've done something wrong, let's apologise early, learn from it, and move forward. But if we wait 6, 8, sometimes a year to get to the end of it, it chips away, it dents confidence in us as an organisation. But equally, we've got a responsibility to the cops to follow due process, and sometimes that takes. But something that I'm reassured by is the body-worn camera, the vehicles, our buildings are all videoed and audioed, and that has had a dramatic effect on how people interact with us. And I'm not naive. I imagine it's had a positive impact on some of the officers' behaviour as well. So that's it. And what I say is these are all open to public scrutiny. How we deal with complaints.
All right. Thank you for that, Richard. I'm gonna Richard, can I ask you this? I probably should ask this off air, but if you can come back next week, if not, perhaps the week after, I think perhaps we should have an entire show where people have a chance to ask questions. If we can arrange that, would that be something you'd be interested in?
Yeah, I might struggle next week, but I'm more than happy to engage in any way. If you know, that's why I see my job.
I'll be in touch off camera so we can discuss that off camera, because I'm just thinking off the top of my head that would be good. Now, just a follow-up to that real quick, and then I'm going to let a lady called Maureen ask a question. Is this. Now, I come from a family of medics. My father is a GP. My wife is a GP. My mother is a pharmacist. My stepmother is a pharmacist. My stepfather is a pharmacist. And so of the 5 parental influences I had growing up, all 5 of them are medical people. And actually, no, my stepmother's not a pharmacist, she's a nurse. And so, like Michelle was saying, there is a very strict code of practice for medical practitioners. They have to take something that used to be called a Hippocratic Oath. I think it's been changed now. But in my opinion, I've always kind of seen the police or law enforcement and the medical profession as very similar, in that they are many times put in a position to play God, good or bad. They can make decisions that can affect a person's life, either to live or die, or to the quality of life moving forwards. And that could be positive in terms of intervening in a situation. It could be negative in terms of malpractice. Where I have seen the divergence is we keep getting told that law enforcement officers have a difficult job, and they do. Nobody's denying that. Every day you put on the uniform, you go out, we know sometimes it's a toss-up as to whether or not someone in that department comes back hale and hearty that day. My point then is, because I have had people in my congregation, people I've dealt with through the years, who have been medical practitioners, who for the most innocuous things have either lost the license or lost their credibility or their reputation, and the hammer is swift and it's hard. My question now is, why do law enforcement seem to be the ones with the longest leash? Especially with some of... Go on.
I mean, I was fortunate enough to be on an investigation into an incident at a hospital, and my personal experience, processes in the NHS are not swift, because they just take a long time because of the role that some practitioners have.
Well, you could argue that they're swift when they come to people of color, but that's a different conversation for a different day, because I've heard that yes, you are right there, that they seem to be a lot swifter when the person under review is a person of color. Right, but so I'll let you carry on, because that's not your responsibility.
Can I just also interject and say one thing, and then I must log off again, because I didn't intend, I didn't
go on.
to be on.
I'm leaving you there because I wanted to see your reaction to his answer.
I don't think that it's necessarily that it's swift, but what is happening is that, again, there's a disproportional representation of BAME NHS staff who are put through that process. So you know, in other words, for the slightest thing, as you might, to use your phrase, you then get a very heavy-handed policy, system, process response to it. So what I wanted to know is whether that happens in the police force. And I don't know if it does. I don't know if it does. And certainly we don't hear about it, that, you know, and maybe that's a piece of work for the police to develop around their communications. It's about, you know, if an officer has been found guilty of misconduct or using overuse of force or whatever it is, and it was beyond what was required of him, I think the public need to know that he has been put through a process, and that's the bit that we never hear of. So it's very easy for Joe Blogs on the street to think nothing's been done about it, and this is just accepted, and this is their routine, because we don't know that anything's been done to address that officer. And certainly in the health service, when a BME staff are sent through that process, yes, they're more likely to have serious consequences for them in terms of being struck off, whether it's the nursing register or the medical, coming out of the GMC, for example, having their license to practice medicine taken away from them, which then affects their whole life. So, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, I'm just saying that that is what happens. And it's just whether we're still not clear on to what extent that happens in policing. And to be fair to our force over here, I suppose they are being the proxy for what's going on in America. We are looking at them the way we're looking at the force in America, and it's completely different. And as I said, it's heartening to know the statistic is so low around people being killed by the police in Britain or dying in custody of police in Britain. That's a very good statistic. But again, it's not something that we hear. What we do get is the continual, or the videos of where we see some police brutality, and that makes it look like it's happening all the time, everywhere, every day. But I think I would agree that the majority of police in the country are probably decent, upstanding people, but that is not to take away from the fact that there are some who might not be, and that is the discussion we need to be focusing on, is what happens to those who are not, you know, perpetrating misconduct all the time, being bullies towards members of the public, intimidating members of the public, harassing people based on their race, because that does happen. So I'm going to have to leave now, but thank you so much.
That's fine. Thank you,
so much.
Michelle.
Can I just come in?
One quick second before you come in, just because I'm not going to ask you to ask a question,
Thanks,
Maureen. Just give me a second, Maureen. So I'm going to say, Richard, before you respond to that, I'm going to let Maureen ask her question because I think it's tied, and then I'll let you respond to both of them together.
Yeah.
Go on, Maureen.
I just wanted to ask a quick question, but also to make two comments. One is the term, actually, BME. I think that sends a very subtle message about our position of power in society as a worldwide. We are not the minority. The other issue that I was a little worried about is the narrative around, compared to America, we're not doing too bad. That's like saying you're not as abused as another person. That really doesn't, comparing ourselves to what's going on in America, I don't think it's helpful. But the other question I wanted to ask to the police officer was to say that I know that there are going to be, they're looking at trying to recruit Black people into the police force. However, I'm really curious about how many Black officers are actually in the police force, and if the force are doing anything around their progression and Black workers being in positions of power so that they can affect change.
All right, Richard, over to you.
Okay, I'd have to go around and check the exact figures. It certainly isn't reflective of our communities. I don't want to quote the wrong figure. I've got 12-14% in my head, but of course, if you look at the younger in service, in terms of people joining, we had 30 officers join us last week. 40% of them were female. 30% of them were from the communities of London, so and represented Asian and black communities. So and that's all black communities, Somalians, West Africa, and Afro-Caribbean. So I'm heartened by that. In terms of development and retention, we have our internal processes in terms of role models and giving career pathways to all officers, but in particular female and officers from minority groups. So our processes are quite well embedded. The issue we have is, well, we're talking about minority groups. I was about to tell you about what we're doing for female colleagues, but we do 2 exams, but it's not necessarily just doing the exams and getting rank. You know, there's lots of other areas in terms of traffic specialist roles where they are very, very unrepresentative of the community of London. So it's been highlighted. We have got these independent scrutiny. I know I'm like a stuck record, keep talking about this, but I think it is key just to highlight that we work hand in glove with communities to improve our representation in terms of the shape of our service in East London. So can I just pick up a couple of things, because I really have to go out of a meeting at
That's
half
fine.
2,
That's fine.
I get far more out of this than anyone would believe, because I like being challenged, because it challenges my thinking. I don't want to be validated.
And I appreciate that. And Richard, sorry to cut
Yeah,
you short. Let me just
definitely.
say this real quick. Like I said,
So-
I've spoken to at least 10 law enforcement officials in the last few weeks, which is why I want to follow up with you and your team. Is you, in my opinion, have been the most non-defensive. So we appreciate the fact that you put yourself out there to be challenged, and on behalf of a community, I want to say thank you. So carry on.
So I just think so it's interesting, because words are so powerful, aren't they? And when we talk about death in police custody, everyone gets this image that it's in the police cell and all that. It's death following police contact. So we had an unfortunate man die in the front office at Forest Gate Police Station. But he was a street population, chronic health issue. But because he was in the police station, that's classed as death in police custody. We go to somebody in distress having mental health issues who's attempting to take their life, and they take their life and they die while we're there in our care. That is classified as a death in police custody. It's not the image that people, and we again, my job is to challenge people around the figures, challenge people the way they're thinking. Likewise, you challenge me, because we only need one bad story that will stop good people who make amazing public servants from joining the police, because of that. And we've got to put our hands up. And I think that's what I find refreshing, is that we've got our challenges, but we are trying tirelessly to answer the challenges that are put before us. So I always push back on. I've worked in America on a couple of inquiries, and I've dealt with some of their police forces over here, and I always push back against comparisons. Notwithstanding, the image of a white police officer on George Floyd's neck resonates with a lot of our community, but you know, the figures in the paper last week, there was 1,000 people shot and killed by American police in 1 year. That's in the last 12 months. Their society is so different, access to firearms, their crime profile is so different. I do push back on that, but notwithstanding how that image resonates through our society, and we've got to challenge ourselves, and we'd be very, very naive if we didn't see that resonance and the challenge it gives us as an organisation to see what we do and how we can improve it. So, Israel, I've really got to shoot, because I'm 15 minutes.
We're supposed to be ending in a minute, so thank you very much,
Okay.
Richard. I appreciate that.
Richard,
Yeah.
can I just come in quickly, just before you go? I just want to put out to you that in terms of what Michelle talked about, or the profession, that are public facing in terms of their if they have a professional misconduct. I've had obviously in the last 3 weeks as well in the states that some states are now considering to ensure that there is a register that perhaps will be public to have details of perhaps police that I might have had disciplinary hearing.
So can I,
or in terms of depression, is this something that you would
yeah, so there is,
you will also adopt?
so to reassure people, if officers face a misconduct board of gross misconduct, there is a public register of that. Officers who are dismissed or get sanctions from that board, they are matter of public record. Again, that has caused issue with us, with our staff in terms of privacy and things like that. But in sense of openness, when I said it's a public hearing, it is, and those results are published. So I'll find out. And Israel, if I forward you the email link, you can forward it to people in terms of those results. So
I definitely will.
And
thank you so much, Richard, and for all that you've been doing for our community as well, and to the other officers as well.
I echo that, and I should give my regards to Wahid as well, who was on with us last week. Thank you for making out the time.
Well, he's the one who does all the hard work. So I'll kick going. Thank you so much, everyone. All of you, please take care, and God bless. And thank you very much for your questions and the challenge that you give me. So I'll be a better cop for this. So thank you very much, and take care. God bless.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Councillor Yemi, this is where we should be ending the show. I'm going to give you the final word.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for taking time to listen to this conversation. I think, for me personally, it's been enlightening to hear from Detective Richard Tucker speaking this afternoon, and for also giving us the opportunity to continue to engage with them, which I think is something that obviously we definitely need to take. So from my point of view, I mean, we've talked a lot about the impact the police brutality have had on Black and ethnic minority, both here in the States and in UK. And in terms of the movement that we've seen in the last 4 weeks, I think is something that we obviously need to continue to engage with as a community of faith. I personally want to bring to your attention that in terms of the fact that, as part of preparing for this event, Pastor Israel talked about the fact that, as Christians, we're salt and the light. And what does that mean? It means that as Christians, we're charged to make a difference in our community, to be our neighbor's keeper. And, the issue about this, Good Samaritan comes to mind. And for me personally, my Christians upbringing and the values is obviously what have propelled me to take on the public role and to obviously continue to make a difference in the community, both in terms of my nursing career and as well as my my nursing background. So today I want to tell you that as Israelites, Joshua's command, them to cycle around the walls of Jericho, and for 7 days they pulled Jericho apart. So what I'm saying to you today is that we have to be the voice. We have to use the voice of faith to bring the wall of stagnation to our progress down by speaking up and for collective participation. So I want to encourage you today that you need to engage with your community. As I've always tried to encourage people from our community, we do not engage enough in terms of working with your local council, working as a school governor perhaps, and as Richard have just alluded to, they do have the Independent Police Scrutiny Committee as well, where you can hold them to account. So for people that are listening to us today, I want you to take that on board and let us come together to beginning to be the voice for our community. And to finish, I also want to say that what matters now is that our voice is heard with this Black Lives Matter movement. I also want to say that we need to use all the tools in our disposal to ensure that we amplify that voice by engaging meaningfully in the conversation like we have today, and also setting the strategy in which we want to work with our own people as well, with our own community to beginning to have a serious conversation. One of the things that I'm trying to charge the council in relation to the public health report, which again have highlighted, the disproportionate impact on our health, is that we also need to have that serious conversation about how we for our health, and to also ensure that we're engaged in terms of reversing the tide of the gang and the knife culture amongst our young people. So again, thank you for your time, and it's been very enlightened to engage with this conversation this afternoon, and surely I have also gained from that as well. So thank you so much for listening.
All right. Can you hear me now? So I was saying thank you, Councillor Yemi, for all you've done. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here with us. I know you're a very busy individual. I'm making a promise that when the rhetoric dies down, some of us will be here pushing progress. And so I'm putting my hand up to say I am not going to let this conversation and this quote unquote movement die on the altar of public rhetoric and passion and then subside. So whatever role I can play in being a link and a bridge between the community, government, law enforcement, I'm going to continue to have these conversations and work with you guys behind the scenes. And thank you for your responsibility in answering the bell. We're going to be back next week, same time, same platform. I'm going to now, I have an idea for our show next week. I'll put the information out. I need to talk to a couple of people to be sure we can make it work. But Councillor Yemi, not to put you on the spot publicly, will you come back next week if you have the time? So now we can't hear you. Let's see. We can't hear you.
I said, sure, definitely I will come. I just need advance notice.
Okay, so I'm giving you a week in advance. I'm giving you a week in advance, and I'll call you off camera to discuss it as well. And next, I think I really like the chance today that some of you had to ask questions. And so I'm going to put together some time in the show next week in advance so you guys can engage with your local law enforcement and government officials. Before I let you go, just a quick announcement I want to make for those of you who don't know. When we changed the brand of today or the Wednesdays to Kingdom in Motion, we kept the old name, which is a Koinonia Lunch Hour, and we kept that name for one quick second, sorry. We kept that name for a Monday forum that we now have for believers and people of faith in the marketplace. And so we get together every Monday at 1 p.m. This is off camera now. This is on Zoom. We pray, we discuss, we talk, and it's not a church service. It's a think tank of believers who want to see the influence of heaven in the marketplace, how we can be ambassadors of our kingdom, take positions of influence and responsibility, and be salt and light. So I'm inviting you personally every Monday. The details are on your screen. If you send an email, if you want more information, if you send an email to my email address, Jamie, if you could just put that on for me again, revisrael@kcalltothe.org, I'll be glad to give you a bit more information. Also, if you have any questions for any of the people who are on the show today, Detective Tucker, Councillor Osho, if you have an idea of some of the conversations we can have on this show moving forward about where the rubber hits the road between the kingdom and the community, I'd love to hear from you. Get in touch with me. Let's build not just a community, but let's build a system of influence of the kingdom in the earth. So thank you guys so much for your time today. I am going to close the show here. See you same time next week, same stations, quoted unquote stations, same platforms on social media, YouTube and Facebook, and bring some with you next week. Take care and bye-bye.